On the Fringe with Dan RadioStyle. Hope everybody out there's having themselves a great day. You know, I remember back when all the investigations and allegations of sexual misconduct and Russia, and all those things were initially happening. Now, of course, I didn't believe it outright. I didn't think it was true. But I was, like many of us, I think, was saying, well, shoot, if these things have happened, we definitely want to get to the bottom of it. And so let's investigate. One thing that's interesting is the left never seems to feel that way when it's them that needs to be investigated. And I would think, as any rational person would, that if there's election misbehavior or if there's some issues maybe with some votes or some possibly some laws that weren't being followed like one would expect or that you're supposed to, if those kinds of things maybe weren't happening, well, I would think I would want to get to the bottom of it and make sure, one, going forward, I am following all the laws, and two, just make sure that nothing inappropriate happened. I mean, ultimately, don't we all want to know the truth? Don't we all want to know who won the election legally and legitimately? Yet it seems like I was talking to a couple friends I've got, not the ones I work with, but someone else. Just the idea that any of this is happening is absurd. That's what the media is talking about right now, which, by the way, I've literally removed. I literally have not turned on Fox TV, Fox News at all. I think I'm going on 4 days now. 4 days, not one moment during the day have I had Fox News on. I'm not watching any news, by the way, from the TV. But again, just something I've done, and man, I feel better. And it's amazing how you feel when you start to look at different information that's not necessarily negative. But again, it seems like the deep state, the left, a lot of people don't really want to look into this. And they say, well, there's no proof, there's no allegations, there's no evidence that would suggest that anything inappropriate happened. And unfortunately, that's far from true. I'm going to share a bunch of examples. I've got some great stuff here. This first slide with Bill Barr is actually kind of surprising in and of itself. But again, we're just going to start digging into it. There's a lot to suggest that this is far from over, first. Second, we may win, we may not win. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that Trump is probably the most likely winner of the election. But there's a lot of things that have to come to the surface if we're ever going to know that for sure. There's a lot of suspicion, there's a lot of circumstantial evidence, and there's some even direct evidence from eyewitnesses that were apparently either A, witnessing from afar, or that were actually employees that are whistleblowers. Again, the whistleblower thing. The left, they have a whistleblower against the right. Oh my God, you should trust them no matter what they say. They're totally right. They have to be. And who would lie about such a thing? But if there's a whistleblower that speaks out against them, well, all of a sudden, they get shafted down. I mean, Biden had accusations of sexual harassment. No surprise to anybody, but he had some accusations. And the way they kind of buried that story was rather fascinating. Yet Trump, anybody could claim that they met Trump in some situation, and they will throw the book at him. So that all being said, Attorney General Bill Barr has authorized federal prosecutors to investigate, this is important, substantial, quote, substantial allegations of voter fraud. And I'll be honest, I like the fact that he's coming at it, one, from that angle, which again, the left's going to tear up. It's going to bother the crap out of him. But he's basically saying there needs to be a clear and apparently credible, end quote, issue. It needs to be something that's just a little more than, we have a funny feeling, or we were looking at the numbers and the Benford's numbers didn't quite add up. No, that's not really enough evidence to do an entire recount or anything like that, or really dig in. But he says if there is credible evidence, then he definitely wants to look into it. So the criteria that Barr lays out mostly restricts legal investigations of alleged fraud to incidences where the fraud would potentially impact the outcome of the election itself. The plethora of closely contested swing states, such as Arizona, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, could conceivably be the subject of investigations, as even a small occurrence of potential voter fraud could impact the outcome of their elections. Recounts, fraud investigation, and legal challenges are regular features of elections. It's very true. There's always a little bit of hanky-panky going on in the background. Just generally, it doesn't seem like this much. There's a lot of things that just don't seem to add up with all this. So there's no reason to believe that they shouldn't be included in next year's presidential election. So campaign officials, candidates, and federal and state authorities should accurately and concisely probe and investigate election proceedings. Again, it's very important from the standpoint of believing in the election and making sure that all of us, left and right, can move forward lockstep in this new world that we're facing right now, rather than one side disbelieving in the system even more, which was what Trump was talking about for 4 years. We saw what happened to him, and now we see what happens during the election. So a lot of people on the other side of the equation, the side I'm standing on, it seems like, are like, something major is happening. This is really, really weird. I've never seen this in my entire life. It's almost like you're in the middle of an earthquake and you're sitting and a big crack is forming right between you and the other people that you've been talking to, your friends, right? And this giant crack's forming and you're like, what side of the crack am I on? Am I on the side that falls or am I on the side that stays? And that's kind of where I think a lot of us are at. That all being said, the states have until December 8th to conduct recounts and investigations into election improprieties, with members of the Electoral College meeting the next week to formally cast their votes for the candidates they represent. This is an important thing to keep in mind because my guess is if any of these investigations get stonewalled, get blocked in any way, shape, or form, if you hear about that in any way, shape, or form, anything meant to try to postpone the ability to get factual information by December 8th, any places where that plays out, I'm telling you, the way this is going to happen, because this is going to happen. The Dems are going to, that's the next thing that's going to occur, is they're going to stonewall and put up blocks. So this December 8th day is going to come, and a lot of answers won't be there yet. What happens then? At that point, Supreme Court obviously has to get involved because now the laws have not been followed. Laws have been put in place about Pennsylvania and not changing things, and they've done it anyways. There's been laws about where the judge came in and said, you have to let these poll watchers come in, and they still didn't. There's a lot of concerns around how this process played out. One thing that's really interesting is Mike Pompeo here. This is a short little snippet of a question that, of course, the reporter would ask, but his answer's kind of interesting.
Is the State Department currently preparing to engage with the Biden transition team? And if not, at what point does a delay hamper a smooth transition or pose a risk to national security?
There will be a smooth transition to a second Trump administration. All right, we're ready. The world is watching what's taking place here. We're going to count all the votes. When the process is complete, there'll be electors selected. There's a process. The Constitution lays it out pretty clearly. The world should have every confidence that the transition necessary to make sure that the State Department is functional today, successful today, and successful with the president who's in office on January 20th, a minute afternoon, will also be successful.
So Mike Pompeo, I think, states it quite succinctly and very well, I might add, and that, yeah, this will happen. Don't worry about it. I know Biden's pushing forward, and now Biden's supposedly suing the Trump administration for blocking his ability to begin his transition team. But the problem is, Mr. Biden, they haven't officially announced it. Only the media has announced it. It is not officially announced, and as Mike Pompeo was speaking to, there are processes, and it is very well spelled out in the Constitution, and I'm quite sure they didn't have news yet, right? The free press, I think they allowed back then, but certainly didn't have news agencies, and they weren't allowing the press to call elections. That's not how it played out. So it's good that way. So one thing that's kind of an interesting thing, first, polls. If anybody believes a poll from this point on for the rest of their life, you have not learned anything at all. So that's the first thing right off the bat I would say. Don't believe polls. Polls are stupid. Polls are meant to cause you to believe a certain way. Hey, guess what? I've got a poll to show you, though, because it works well for me. No, but seriously, the same thing applies, by the way. I take these numbers with a grain of salt, but I do think it's a funny poll. It's coming from Epoch Times, so I expect there's probably a very conservative feel to it. But less than half of new poll less than half of the people polled believe that Biden is actually the lawful election winner. And apparently 1/3 say Trump won, which means a lot of people, much like myself, I mean, I think Trump won, but a lot of people, much like myself, are like, I want to see the information. So less than half believe Biden won, which actually is a huge victory. A lot of you might think, that's almost half the people. Nah, that's what the mainstream media, these are people that are still asleep. Seriously. So that means more than half of the population is likely somewhat more awakened to what's actually going on today versus the other side that gets a very limited amount of information, and it is very controlled what they understand or what they think they understand. It's a very different situation from this independent media where we literally do try to give you as much information as we can, and certainly we try to give it to you as a timely a manner as possible. But, it is what it is. Now, speaking of media outlets and all of the wonderful things that they're able to do with their technology and their ability to show us everything in live moments, well, that's kind of backfired on them a little bit. So apparently all capitalized ALL media outlets pull their live voting total update feeds. The live feeds, this was as of the 9th, so as of yesterday, the live feeds that were showing the numbers happening on the screen for each state, they've stopped that. You want to know why? There's a picture down here. I don't know if you can see it very well, but on the left, we show Trump at 1.69 million votes, and below that, 1.25 million votes. And then almost immediately, it became 1.67 votes, down 20,000, and Biden's numbers went up to 1.27. It went up by 20,000. That's weird, because that never ever happens in real life. That would be strange, wouldn't it, to have 20,000 shaved here and then instantly added there? So one of the things a lot of people you've got to keep in mind with numbers, and it's kind of fun about the way numbers work in Electoral College, and oh my God, he's 6 points over. Yes, but when you take like Pennsylvania, for example, right, that's 20-point state. So say Biden's sitting at 276, right? I don't even know what his numbers are. It doesn't even matter. But say he's sitting at 276, and he's got Pennsylvania. Well, when I take Pennsylvania away from him and give it to Trump, that takes 20 points from him and adds 20 points to Trump. It's a 40-point move. So when these polls switchies happened, if they did, these glitches is what they're being called, and there seems to be a number of cases where these glitches occurred. People have been live recording these things, and there's lots of evidence of that. It's one of the places where I think the media got themselves in trouble, and it's probably too late. But that being said, that's a 40,000 vote shift. That's huge. That's enormous. That hurt Trump, 20,000 legitimate voters, quite possibly taken away from him, and then arbitrarily given to somebody else. Very bad. So understand, this is kind of how this game is played. I'm not saying this has happened everywhere. I'm saying here's evidence of something that happened within a short period of time. None of these other numbers are the same, 42%, 20, like nothing changed. Just a second later, 20,000 swing both ways, or a 40,000 point swing in the big picture. It's what we're up against. Now, the Gateway Pundit did an amazing job on this story, and I'm not going to beat it to death. I'm going to get into it a little bit, though. So they have a complete list of suspected fraud. I'm not saying it's fraud. This is the ugly word that you're not allowed to claim, and I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying I'd like us to look into any of these irregularities or any of these strange moments that have happened, and so make sure there's not fraud. Fraud's something that happens time and time and time again, right? Fraud is like a major hole in the system. I'm not saying that's actually what happened. I think we have maybe one election that had the opportunity for a lot of irregularities. That's all I'm saying. So overall, manual recounts, any state where the Dominion vote machines were used. That's probably going to happen. This is where we're seeing glitches, is this software. Now, I understand, and I don't know what they were talking about because they were in a skiff, but the day of the election, there was a skiff that the administration was a part of, and they were paying close attention to these voting results. And from what I understand, specifically some of this CIA software that may have been put out there. And since they were in a skiff, it would have made it almost impossible for the CIA to know they were doing it. So it's an interesting little spy versus spy, maybe, but that's one thing. Also, they want to focus on closely contested and swing states, focus on cities like Milwaukee, Detroit, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, Atlanta, Las Vegas, Phoenix, Minneapolis, just to name a few. Focus on absentee and mail-in ballots. Investigate Biden-only votes, meaning the votes that all they did was stamped Biden for president and nothing else. Very strange. That's irregular for sure, by definition. Identify dead people who voted. There seems to be quite a number of these, dozens. I haven't heard like hundreds yet. I think it's probably in the hundreds, but I haven't heard, still, that's a swing. That's a loss. They're not going to Trump, but that's certainly a loss of numbers that shouldn't be there. They want to identify felons who voted, identify illegal aliens who voted, children who voted, individuals who voted more than once, which probably happened a little bit. Certainly, they've got questions, too, about maybe people that have dual residency within states, right? Maybe they're in California part of the year and Nevada the other part of the year and might very well have voted in both elections. That's technically illegal as an individual to do that. So it depends how these things played out, but they will look into it. It's not hard to figure out that the same social security number, the same person basically voted twice, unless their names are different. That would complicate it a little bit because I know they're going to match on name. Identified, it's individuals voted more than once. We've got newly registered individuals over 90 years old. That's possible. Seems strange, though. Probably worth looking into. They're going to identify non-registered voters and review. So there's people that somehow managed to vote and didn't and weren't registered. And then identify who made the call to stop counting in certain states. There was a rationale for doing so and timing of that call. So there's some questions. These are a lot of the things that they think the questions should be asked about what's going on. Now, when people say, well, what sort of evidence is there? Well, there's quite a bit. They've identified 450,000 ballots that miraculously only voted for Joe Biden. That's super weird. And so that was Sidney Powell was talking about that one recently. We've got Republicans that won 28 of 29 of the most competitive House seats. They added 3 state legislators, and they did not lose a single House race. That's insane. Just that in and of itself is amazing that somehow the Republicans won so big on the street, but somehow couldn't carry that through to the White House. It's just kind of unheard of, so that's weird. That's an irregularity. We got swing states that are showing Biden's votes suspiciously far exceeding Democrat down ticket votes, meaning there's so many more votes for Biden than there ever would have been normally on a Democratic ticket. Just people that just vote Democrat all the way. Their numbers are just weird. Now, I'm not getting into necessarily that Benford's thing, but that is one thing here. Additional Benford analysis of Chicago and Pittsburgh, like Milwaukee, show likely voter fraud benefiting Biden. Now, from the thing that Barr came out with, they're going to need more than that. And for those of you, I talked about it recently, but Benford's law just has to do with the first number of the data sets, and that certain first numbers tend to show up more than other first numbers. And just the more data you put together, it starts to create a graph like this one here, where the first column tends to be higher and they kind of start to dip down in a very normal pattern. They've seen these patterns that are all spiky in the middle and then come down, which is super weird. And again, the more data you have, the more it starts to follow Benford's law. The fewer data points you have, it tends to be a little more erratic. It's just mathematics. It's craziness, whatever. Trump attorney, manual recounts may be necessary in 30 states after software glitch. 30 states may need to have some manual recounts. That right there is going to be incredible because the glitches, if they're similar to the first one I was sharing, are double swings, right? The 20,000 one way, 20,000 the other. That's a 40,000 point swing. These 30 states of glitches, that's a two-way swing. That just in and of itself will make an enormous difference in the outcome of this election and possibly the Senate races. And that's one of the other things I was kind of wondering about because I think the Senate races did not turn out kind of how they should. Oddly, Graham won, which, I don't know, I was wondering about that and still wondering where he falls on the spectrum of things. I feel like, anyway. So they're also going to search voter rolls for dead voters. This is something that we should probably try to prohibit dead people from voting. I just think once you finally get to die and go home, like you shouldn't have to pay taxes, shouldn't really have to worry about voting anymore, right? Like you're done with all that. You get to just enjoy paradise for the rest of your life. So again, updating corrupted software that's stolen. Again, this is kind of a duplicate of that other one. And again, the corrupted software. So talk about beating a dead horse. They beat the hell out of that one. We've got a list of important days and links to state legislatures to call and demand Democrats that they don't get away with it. You can go and find these things. If you really want to yell at your representative, which is a great idea, then you can look up their phone numbers and call them. I don't mean yell, but if you want to call and express your unhappiness like that would be, phone calls count more than emails, which count, they have a weird way of mathematically breaking that stuff down. Also, I guess keeping the faith. This is important, and I'm going to share some more information. In fact, specifically about this retired operative, Tony Schaefer. I've got this story, and it's very cool. In fact, I believe it's coming up next. So we'll just jump to it. Yeah, there it is. Keep the faith. Keeping the faith. President Trump will win the election based on the Constitution per retired intel operative Tony Schaefer. Now, don't necessarily take this as gospel. This is the Gateway Pundit. This isn't necessarily gospel. This is news. Don't let the news say anything. But this individual was an operative, so he recognizes some of the things. He was part of the CIA, to my understanding, from what this whole article is talking about. So one of the things that he did is Tony Schaefer posed a hypothetical question for all Democrat trolls following my feed. What if DHS anticipated DNC counting fraud? What if they tagged each legitimate ballot? What would happen if DHS does an audit of all counted ballots and finds ballots without the tag? what happens then? I talked about the cybersecurity, what they did for making the ballots with the QRC codes and all these other things, and the fact that you can also create barcodes on these things that are unique per each individual ballot. You have a number that just sequentially updates by one. Every time you print a new ballot, it gets a different number. And then all of a sudden, if you start copying real ballots to make sure they're authentic, well, now all of a sudden you've got the same number way too many times. You should only have it once. Now we've got 6,000 of them or whatever. One of the problems there. The other is the watermark. Now, not all watermarks are visible. So there's a lot of people that are like, oh, watermarks. So they're like grabbing their ballots. And they're like, nah, I don't see a watermark, sucker. You guys can't do that. Yeah, so he's going to bring that up here in a second. But this person, Megalosifer, whatever, it's probably a dinosaur of some kind, right? But isn't ballot production done locally, you say? Because that's what everyone says. No, this is crap. Government doesn't print ballots. Well, Tony responds, it's done in a known contracted sites. You do understand law enforcement asks for cooperation all the time from companies, right? So basically, it is done by very specific companies that have to follow very specific rules. And again, there's very specific paper and there's watermarks, and all these things need to be able to be in there. So again, this guy Lars, watermarks. I love when I do that. Oh, there is more than that now. People don't understand how light works, and what they don't see can be seen in infrared and ultraviolet. We had a whole block of instruction at the farm on secret writing. It is amazing. So again, a lot of people are like, well, I don't see it, so it's not there. Not true. And they knew this was coming. Supposedly, they got to run through the 2018 election. And here we are in 2020. This is the same thing. For all of you that are parents, you'll totally get this. It's like when you know your kid's doing something wrong, but if it's not wrong enough yet to break out the fact that I'm now tipping my hand to my son and letting him know that I know what you're doing, rather than him thinking he's still getting away with stuff, and then maybe I pull out that card when he's really doing something horrible, but maybe I use it as a way of following him a little bit, right? So that's kind of one of the things that happened. They didn't call this stuff out in 2018 per se, but it's all coming out in 2020 because it was always based on this election. We had COVID, we had everything, the lockdowns, the masks, all of this was meant to try to make mail-in voting the way to go, which was the only way that they could really screw with things. Now, granted, they apparently had a CIA program, but that seemed to have been found, figured out, and was able to be dealt with, and has also left its own little signature. So there's a lot to be talked about. So a lot of the things that he points out here at the bottom, the tweets were questions for people to think about. That was one of the things he was trying to do. Certainly the president's team prepared for this year's election and would have considered possible voter fraud on a large scale due to the current environment in the United States. 3, Tony posed his questions and the left went crazy. And based on this, they must know that they are doing is unjust, right? Because they don't want anyone to investigate this. Why? Because they'll probably find something that's not good. So they're like, no, nothing to see here. We won the election. Don't look. Stop looking. So number 4, the courts are going to decide this election. That's almost a guarantee. And the Constitution is on the side of the president. Any illegal votes should not be counted. And when this is addressed, the president will win the election. Likely, but you know what I mean. This is this guy's opinion. There are many actions by the Democrats that indicate they are attempting to steal the election. We have reported numerous stories on this subject since the election. This is, again, very true. There's many stories that are causing questions about whether or not there was some irregularities. The Constitution requires that all valid ballots be received and counted on the first Tuesday in November. Any efforts to drag the election out after this date are not legitimate either. And Pennsylvania is going to fall into that trap. Efforts by the Democrats to prevent oversight and transparency are likely due to corruption. Why has the Biden campaign not urged for transparency during this process? If he knew he legitimately had this in the bag, he would say, yes, let's do that. But he's not. He's like, where's my money for the transition? We should be moving forward. You're just in a hurry, it seems like. That's strange. Almost like you don't want people to realize what happened. So there's no transparency, and that's also going to make it difficult for this trust factor. And I think a lot of us all want to see trust come back into play. Efforts by the Democrats to prevent oversight and transparency are likely due to corruption. That just makes the most sense. I said that already. How come Texas and Florida can be transparent and provide results on election eve, but other states could not and even stopped counting? Historically, Iowa, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Florida and Georgia vote very similarly. What happened this year to break this connection? Why were things changed late at night in some of these states? Again, some people said, all right, we'll stop counting, and then we'll come back in the morning, we'll begin counting again, and then overnight, thousands of votes showed up all for Biden, or at least hugely swaying towards Biden. Just overnight, when they were supposed to have people watching them count, just magically were still counting. And the last thing here is, if there is an ongoing investigation into any of this, would the president comment on it, or would it be more proper not to? When I did my video a couple videos ago about 10 Days of Darkness, that's what we're talking about. That is why Trump is kind of being a little weak. Act weak when you are strong. Act strong when you are weak. That's what they say in The Art of War by Sun Tzu, right? So that is where he's at right now. He's projecting weakness for a reason. They're getting their ducks in a row. This 10 Days of Darkness, though, I've heard stories that maybe by next week he will be making some announcements about where the legal paths have gotten him. This is where we're at right now. So again, breaking news from the Right Scoop. Michigan election fraud lawsuit filed with sworn affidavits detailing major voter fraud. So we've got a lady, apparently, or person, Jesse Jacob. I am an adult citizen and a resident of the state of Michigan. I have been an employee for the city of Detroit for decades. I was assigned to work the elections. I received training. I worked at the election. I processed absentee ballots packaged and sent to voters while I worked at the election. I was instructed by my supervisor to adjust the mailing date of these absentee ballot packages to be dated earlier than they were actually sent. The supervisor was making announcements for all workers to engage in this practice. There's more to go on down from his affidavit. This is an individual that's a whistleblower, and he is claiming on a signed affidavit, which is illegal to lie on, mind you. If they go in and start studying this and find he lied, he's in huge trouble. It's a federal document. That's a federal crime. So they make you sign the affidavit, which means this guy believes what he saw was what he experienced. So this is major. This means Michigan is now basically in play. Pennsylvania is going to be the same. That's all they need, is they need to be able to get a lawsuit against the states. And these questionable states, if they can get the lawsuit going, get a recount, or get some way to kind of reassess certain bigger cities where the major changes might have happened, this could very easily turn this election into the favor of Donald J. Trump. Also breaking from the Right Scoop, Trump files new lawsuit in Pennsylvania to halt certification of election results. Now, Pennsylvania was trying really hard to push forward and certify those results, which again is kind of strange. Why would you be in such a hurry if everything's on the up and up? We've got until, the 18th of December. I think they're supposed to file by, the 8th or something like that, right? Whatever the dates are exactly. But they got time. There's no need to be in a hurry. The rest of the country's having an issue. Why would you try to rush to judgment? And these are the ones, I believe, that were locking people out, putting window coverings up. These are happening in Detroit, too. They're happening all over. So there's a lot of questions as to what was going on inside Philadelphia. And again, irregularities. A lawsuit right now, U.S. Rep sues Dallas Elections Department for refusing GOP poll watchers in Texas. Now, Texas went red, but there are some additional reps that very well might be able to win their elections if given the opportunity. Arizona, voting machines, ballot counters abandoned at a strip mall. Republicans did not sign a certificate of accuracy. This is a weird thing, too. I don't fully understand all the details in this. They were just leaving some of these things lying around in some abandoned strip mall, which is a little freaky. And again, the Republicans never actually signed the data as accurate. They never came in and actually said, yes, I agree with this whole, the way this is going to happen and how this plays out. That never got signed. So it's odd that for whatever reason, here it is, I formally and publicly call on Ray Chornsky and First Vice Chair Linda Brickman, who should have been there in her stead if she could not make it, to resign effective immediately. This is 100% unacceptable and has contributed to the collapse of the Arizona voter confidence. And this is the certificate of accuracy that she was supposed to sign. And they didn't. They never really gave their letter of recommendation, if you will, that they agreed with this. So Arizona was just kind of running blind without any person on the Republican side given a crud, apparently. And again, just to add insult to injury and some of the strangeness that's happening, Brian Stelter suddenly rushes to defend Fox News over election coverage. Brian Stelter, the guy from NBC, MSNBC. He's talking to this dude. This guy, I don't know who he is, but seems pretty pro-Trump, and I stopped it midway because it was annoying and it was just bothersome. He was saying pro-Trump things. The question hadn't come up. I don't really care. Stelter is unreal that now all of a sudden he's going to back Fox up because, they called it early and they called it right. I mean, we had that video I shared yesterday where what's-her-face from Fox was like, don't they know we've called it? Like she didn't realize her mic was on or something. So again, stuff's coming out. People are seeing it. There's no way around it. We're going to see what happens after this election is looked at by the courts. I don't think there's any other way around it. Happened in 2020. And again, as I talked about yesterday, in 2020, people on the Bush team, 3 of them anyways, are now Supreme Court justices. Roberts, Kavanaugh, and Coney Barrett were all part of the legal team Bush used back in 2000 for that fiasco. The proper pieces are in place. This is where they kept talking about trusting the plan. There's nothing any of us at this point can do about it, right? Nothing. This is really where trusting the plan has to happen because there's no other option. Hopefully a lot of us can somewhat be cheerleaders right now to get all of us feeling a little better about this journey because it is a little scary. And ultimately, that's where we are. And so this will play out. The courts will get involved. And whatever those results are, we all need to get behind, period, right? Even if the courts come out and say Biden won, all right, everybody, then we will live to fight another day. And 2024 will be the next time we really go at it. 2022, we should try to change how, right? And no matter what, 2022 should still be a big year for the Republican Party because they should be able to continue this motion. A lot of House seats changed hands. A lot of House seats were won by Republicans. We are far from over, and the evidence actually suggests that the Republicans likely won this round. So we'll see how it plays out, but keep that in mind and understand that there are people that have sort of dropped off the YouTube verse, maybe on BitChute, maybe on other places. So make sure you're checking some of those alternative sources for maybe people that you've lost sight of or even me, and you might have better luck finding people that way. That might help a lot. So hopefully we can stay and continue to support this whole entire process. This is life-changing. This is world-changing. I don't think anything's really ever going to be the same after this year, or at least after next year. We'll see how long all this stuff starts to drag out. But again, we got to support each other. Where we go one, we go all. It's on the Fringe with Dan RadioStyle.